Thank you, Gina, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us. This is the fourth of 6 presentations to the 6 community plan areas throughout the county that are eligible to have a cannabis retail outlet sited in that area. And I know that there's a great deal of public interest and public concern around that, and we're hopeful tonight that we're going to be able to answer some of your questions. I'm joined by Gina DePinto, who you just heard introduce us and who's responsible, thank you, Gina, for setting up tonight's presentation, by Carlos Saraceno, who is doing the Spanish translation, by Stephen Yee from the County Executive Office Cannabis Licensing Division, and Catherine Lair from Planning and Development. I want to talk just for a couple minutes about what tonight is. Tonight is to offer you an explanation of the process involved in selecting an applicant and helping that applicant obtain a business license, explaining what exactly that process is involved, an explanation of the planning and development requirements for site placement, and an overview of the Orcutt community plan area. And perhaps most importantly, it's your opportunity to weigh in whether you are a potential vendor or a resident. There's several things that tonight is not. It is not the night where we are going to select a vendor. It is not the night when we are going to select a site. And I'm very well aware that there is a belief among some people who have commented to us that somehow a decision has been made already and that site process is completed. And nothing could be further from the truth. And hopefully by the time tonight is over, that will be made very clear. It is also not a night where a final decision is going to be made on the scoring sheets or the weighting, and I'll come back and talk about that in a minute. And perhaps most importantly, it is not your only opportunity to weigh in. Before the evening's over, you will be given the email addresses of a number of people as well as the Cannabis website. You can stay connected with us at cannabis.countyofsb.org, that link that's on the bottom of the screen that's in front of you. The next board meeting where all of this will be presented and where the score sheets will be finalized is on August the 18th. And there will be at least one and probably more additional board meetings before any site selections are finalized. A rough timeline on the process, and Stephen will go into it a little bit more, is these community meetings that we started holding last week. They were supposed to be held, they were going to start originally in late March and early April, but as I think everyone's aware, the world that we knew then is radically different, and which is why we're doing this virtual meeting and why this process has been delayed this long. There's a board meeting on August the 18th to finalize the score sheets and to explain briefly the input from each of the community plan areas. And then at some point when a specific date is selected to open the application period, by ordinance, there's a 30-day, that announcement has to be done publicly 30 days prior to the opening of the application period. And the application period is actually open for 7 days. And then there's a scoring process, which Stephen will explain to you. And then we come back to the board, as I said, at least once. In front of you, you see the dates with the 4 meetings, or counting tonight, the 4 meetings that have been held. And there will be 2 additional meetings, Eastern Toledo Valley next Wednesday and Los Alamos next Thursday. I don't need to tell everybody this, but this particular site in the Orcutt community plan area is in the 4th supervisorial district. And with that, I would like to introduce Stephen Yee from the County Cannabis Licensing. He works in the County Executive Office that oversees cannabis business licensing, and he will walk us through that process. Stephen?
Thank you, Mr. Malekian. Good evening, residents of Santa Barbara County. As Mr. Malekian mentioned, my name is Stephen Yee, and I'm a fiscal and policy analyst representing the county's executive office. I also serve as the coordinator of the Cannabis program's business licensing function. The objectives of my presentation today are twofold. One, to provide an overview of the county's merit-based cannabis retail storefront licensing selection process, and two, detail the county's cannabis business license application submittal requirements and associated review process. The county's merit-based retail storefront selection process commences with an application that requires the following: an application deposit fee, all requirements as stated in the Business License Ordinance, Chapter 50, except for live scans, a seller's permit, and an issued land use entitlement. A business operations proposal is required, and so is a neighborhood compatibility plan. Upon submittal of the application package, staff will perform the following initial reviews. The County Executive Office will review the application package and perform a review for overall completeness. And the Planning and Development Department will perform a review to ensure that the proposed operation location is properly zoned. If any portion of the application is incomplete or the proposed location is not properly zoned, a notice of non-acceptance will be issued to the applicant, and the application will not move forward for further processing. If the application is deemed complete and the location is properly zoned, the application moves on to the next phase of review and scoring. This second phase consists of a review of the Chapter 50 requirements. This review is conducted by the business licensing team, and the resulting scores are assigned a 25% weighting factor. The second component of this phase is a review of the business operations proposal conducted by a third-party evaluator and is assigned a 75% weighting factor. Aggregate scores of 85% or higher move on to the next phase of review and scoring. Those applicants achieving a score of less than 85% are noticed and will not move forward in the selection process. Phase 3 of the selection process consists of review, scoring, and force ranking of applications by community plan area. This will be conducted by an internal selection committee on the following two components: the Chapter 50 requirements weighted at 10% and the neighborhood compatibility plan weighted at 90%. Applicants achieving the highest score in each community plan area will be allowed the opportunity to apply for a land use entitlement and must also submit a complete cannabis business license application. Next, I'd like to detail the cannabis business license application submittal and review processes so that the public has a thorough understanding of the rigorous requirements and review process that our board has adopted. At a high level, cannabis business licensing allows for an inquiry into the fitness of the proposed entity and all individuals associated with the business, including owners, managers, supervisors, and employees. A business license is required for any person or entity who intends to engage in a commercial cannabis operation in the county. A business license must be obtained prior to commencement of business. However, an exception has been made for those legal non-conforming cultivators who are operating under the state's medicinal laws prior to January 2016. Further, any person or entity seeking or possessing a cannabis state license must obtain the corresponding county business license. Cannabis business licenses, once issued, are valid for a term of 1 year. A final, unappealable, approved and issued land use entitlement is required prior to issuance of a business license. For any changes in ownership greater than 10%, a new business license application must be submitted. Finally, cannabis business licenses, once issued, are non-transferable. Per the Cannabis Business License Ordinance, a cannabis business licensing team has been assembled and consists of county departments and one outside agency that have been assigned review responsibilities relating to the review of submitted license applications. The departments that make up the licensing team are as follows: the Agricultural Commissioner, the County Executive Office, County Fire, the Carpinteria Summerlin Fire District, Environmental Health Services, which is a division of the Public Health Department, Planning and Development, the Sheriff's Office, Sustainability, which is a division of the Community Services Department, and the Treasurer Tax Collector. The application content that operators are required to submit and that which our licensing team reviews is as follows. Background and contact information, which includes all applicant and agent names and contact information. The name and contact info for all business owners, managers, supervisors, employees, and persons having a 10% or more financial interest in the entity. A 24-hour contact name and phone number in case of any complaints that need addressing. Government issued ID for all owners, managers, supervisors, and employees to verify that all individuals meet the appropriate age requirements. And the entity name, address, and license numbers for all other commercial cannabis operations currently being operated or previously operated by the applicant. We also gather the following information on the operation: a full description of the proposed activities and products, proposed hours of operations, the total number of employees, the physical address and assessor's parcel number, a property and premise diagram, and evidence of the authority to operate, which consists of either proof of ownership of the premises or, if rented or leased, written permission from the property owner authorizing the tenant or lessee to conduct commercial cannabis activities at the site, and this authorization must be notarized. Additionally, applicants must provide the following state information: copies of the applicant's state licenses or applications, the quantity and type of state licenses that will be required for the proposed operation, a state seller's permit or evidence that the applicant is applying for one, and as mentioned previously, an issued land use entitlement is also required. As for business entity requirements, the applicant must provide the name and contact information for the business entity, the entity's legal status, and proof of registration with the California Secretary of State. Applicants are also required to submit other supporting documentation, such as a quality control plan. This plan must address procedures on how the applicant will comply with state standards for non-contamination. Additionally, applicants must also submit an inventory control plan to demonstrate the ability to track the location of all cannabis product and be able to reconcile inventories with the records in the track and trace database, which all operators must comply with. There are also requirements that must be met regarding site security plans and background checks. The site security plan elements that applicants must address are as follows: a perimeter security system, including fencing, locks, and alarms, motion-activated perimeter exterior lighting, an alarm system maintained by a licensed company with central monitoring capabilities, and a video security system with 24-hour monitoring. Applicants must also identify limited access areas and associated protocols, as well as an employee training plan. And applicants must identify professional security personnel, which is a requirement for all retail storefront licenses. Criminal background checks are required for any individual associated with the cannabis operation. All owners, managers, and supervisors are required to go through a live scan background check conducted by our Sheriff's Office that discloses no felony convictions. For employees, it is incumbent upon the business entity to perform background checks on all employees and to retain the results. For any individual that successfully passes the background check, the Sheriff's Office then provides an ID card that must be worn at all times when on site at the cannabis operation location. Again, per the business license ordinance, each department or agency of the licensing team is assigned specific review responsibilities for a given application. Generally, the licensing team reviews the license application and supporting documentation. They also visit the operation location to conduct site inspections. Once each department or agency approves of their review portion of the license review process, the County Executive Office may provide recommendation of license issuance to the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office. The Treasurer Tax Collector then performs a review of the applicant's cannabis tax status, and if no delinquencies exist, they may produce and issue the license. Again, once a license is issued, it is valid for 1 year. Per the business license ordinance, a licensed operator must submit a renewal application annually. The review of a renewal license application consists of the following reviews by the licensing team: a review of odor complaints and responses to those complaints in compliance with the county's zoning ordinance, review of the renewal application and supporting documentation, and lastly, site inspections. In addition to the annual renewal requirement and the associated review process, the licensing team performs ongoing compliance checks throughout the term of the license to ensure compliance with the business licensing ordinance. The licensing team has established compliance check schedules to perform these mid-year visits. And finally, per the business license ordinance, county officials and staff may inspect the cannabis operations records, books, accounts, financial data, and any and all data relevant to its licensed activities for the purpose of conducting an audit or an examination. And with that, I'll turn the presentation back over to Mr. Malekian.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for that comprehensive explanation of the business licensing and the application process, which, as I think everyone can see, is quite extensive. We'll now turn to Catherine Lair from the Planning and Development Department, who will talk through site selection and the site requirements from the Planning and Development Department's perspective. Catherine.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Malekian. Hello, my name is Catherine Lair. I'm a supervising planner in the cannabis section of the county's Planning and Development Department. As Mr. Yee noted, any future cannabis storefront retail businesses will need to obtain a land use entitlement through planning and development. The next few slides provide an overview of the permit process for potential cannabis retail businesses, where these retail businesses can potentially be located, and what happens after an applicant obtains a permit through the planning department. The county code defines cannabis storefront retail as the retail sale and delivery of cannabis or cannabis products to customers and is referred to hereinafter as a storefront retailer. A storefront retailer is required to operate from a licensed premise, which is basically the physical location from which these commercial activities are conducted. A retailer's premise may be closed to the public, and a storefront retailer may also conduct some sales by delivery. Land use permitting is regulated by 3 separate ordinances. Oh, next slide, please. Land use permitting is regulated by 3 separate ordinances for the inland, coastal, and Montecito areas of the county. Any future cannabis retailer applications will be analyzed and processed through one of these ordinances. Storefront cannabis retail businesses located in the inland area are allowed in most commercial zone districts, as well as some manufacturing zone districts, with the approval of a land use permit. Similarly, in certain mixed-use zone district areas throughout the county, cannabis storefront retailers are allowed with a conditional use permit. I'll provide a more detailed overview of the land use and conditional use permit processes in the next slide. Storefront retailers located in the coastal zone of the county require a coastal development permit and are only allowed in commercial zone districts. Finally, the Montecito Development Code does not afford zoning for cannabis storefront retailers in that area. Although cannabis storefront retailers can be permitted in all of the aforementioned zone districts, there are also other locational criteria that may limit the location of these businesses. For example, storefront retailers may not be located within 750 feet from schools providing instruction in kindergarten or any grade 1 through 12, daycare centers, or youth centers. We will provide a more detailed overview of the Orcutt community plan area and highlight zone districts that could potentially allow storefront retailers in future slides. As previously mentioned, any future storefront retailer will need to obtain a land use, coastal development, or conditional use permit through the planning department. We'll now go over the land use and coastal development permit processes. An applicant is first required to meet the applicable requirements under the business license review process, which Mr. Yee provided in detail, after which they can submit a land use application to planning and development. Our staff then reviews the project for conformity with all applicable zone district requirements, such as setbacks and parking, as well as cannabis-specific development standards. Certain applications will need to be reviewed by other county agencies, such as the fire department, environmental health services, and even potentially some other external agencies, such as Caltrans. Once an application is deemed complete, and all of the analysis is completed and the project is ready for a decision, the planning department will notify all property owners and residents within 1,000 feet of the subject property, as well as any interested parties. The mailed notice also includes information on how to appeal a decision. Once the planning department makes a decision on a project, which can be either approval or denial of an application, there is a 10 calendar day appeal period for applicants or members of the public to appeal the department's decision. For projects requiring a land use or coastal development permit, the department's general goal is to make a decision within 3 to 6 months. The permit process for a conditional use permit is similar to what we just went through with the land use permit, except that a conditional use permit requires a public hearing, and the project must meet additional findings that are focused on ensuring neighborhood compatibility of all of the proposed uses. As detailed in the prior slide, our staff will review these applications for conformance with all applicable zone district requirements and cannabis development standards, and staff will obtain all required clearances from other agencies as applicable. When projects that require conditional use permits are ready for public hearing, staff will send a notice to all property owners and residents within 1,000 feet of the subject property, as well as interested parties. Notices for conditional use permits also include the date of the public hearing, as well as information on how someone can file an appeal. For projects that require a conditional use permit, the department's general goal for making a decision on the project is 6 to 9 months. If the planning department approves a project, applicants must still complete several post-approval requirements. For example, applicants will need to comply with all conditions of approval that are placed on the project from other county departments, and applicants must also obtain grading or building permits as needed. Additionally, storefront retailers will need to obtain a county business license from the county executive office, as outlined earlier in tonight's presentation. So now we'll take a brief overlook at the Orcutt community plan area. So this map identifies potential sites that storefront retail operations can be located within the Orcutt community plan area. The green area of the map are zone districts that allow cannabis storefront retailers. These include commercial, C1 and C2, manufacturing, and mixed-use districts described earlier in my presentation. It's really important to note that these areas only show the zone districts where future cannabis retailers could potentially be located. However, as previously described, any future business would need to go through the appropriate county permit processes before they were allowed to operate. Areas outlined in blue are sensitive receptors and include schools, daycares, or youth centers. And you'll see on this slide, they're surrounded by a red 750-foot buffer. These buffer areas show where no storefront retailers can occur. So for example, even though the green zones in this area could potentially allow for storefront retailers to operate, because of these sensitive buffer areas, they would not be able to obtain permits from planning and development or operate in this area. Finally, additional information and map resources can be found at the county's cannabis webpage, located at cannabis.countyofsb.org. I'm sure a lot of you are pretty familiar since you've likely accessed this website to get to tonight's meeting. Specifically though, we wanted to point you in the direction of our interactive cannabis mapping program, where you can explore a more interactive version of the maps shown on tonight's screen. This webpage is a great resource for the public and for applicants who have questions about the cannabis projects and permitting in the county. So now if I can do a share screen here. I will walk everyone through how to access these. So going to the website that I spelled out earlier, cannabis.countyofsb.org, this is the webpage that gets pulled up. I've clicked on the link for the community engagement meetings that we're having. Scrolling down, there's a list of helpful links, one of which is this permitting and zoning interactive map I mentioned. This other link next to it is a tip sheet for navigating this map if you have some questions. So clicking on this link will bring you to the county's interactive map. For tonight's meeting and for the other community meetings, we've created these specific bookmarks that can allow people to click and automatically zoom to one of the 6 community plan areas. For tonight's meeting, of course, we're looking at the Orcutt community plan. So clicking on this link, it brings me to Orcutt. Using this upper right-hand corner, I'll click on the layer list. And for tonight's meeting, I have these items toggled: 600-foot buffer, 750-foot buffer, as well as parcels in zones allowing cannabis storefront retail. So, and one more, excuse me, sensitive receptors. This sensitive receptors one is noted in blue, and then parcels allowing cannabis storefront retailers are noted in green. As you will see when I zoom in here and I toggle this layer on and off, there's some areas that are both green and blue, meaning although the zoning is appropriate, there's a sensitive receptor located in this area and no cannabis would be allowed to operate. So we're going to take a look at one of these parcels here on Union Valley Parkway. Clicking on this parcel, a little box will pop up. It has the APN information as well as some more information that we've linked to Google Maps. So for those of you that are less familiar with some of these areas or want a better understanding, clicking on this link will pull up the Google Maps. Right now, the site is vacant. So let's try a different one. Zooming out here. So clicking on this site, Park Avenue and Broadway Street, similar information has a site address APN, as well as a link to the Google Maps. Clicking on that, I get an aerial view, and I'm able to understand a little more context and see the neighborhood and the surrounding area. Additionally, for those of you that are a little less familiar, you have this little Google person right here. If you pick them up and drag them, these blue lines highlight where you can place the person down, which allows for a street review. So hopefully those of you who are not familiar with this will utilize this tool and will be able to get a better understanding of the locations that could potentially allow for cannabis storefront retailers. With that, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Malekian.
Thanks, Catherine. I continue to be fascinated by the technology that allows you to look at a specific parcel on a specific site, and hopefully the people will find that helpful as they're researching different aspects of this presentation. We're now going to go to the Q&A portion of our presentation tonight. This is really your opportunity to ask questions, to make comments, to give us your perspective on what you like or don't like about whatever is being presented tonight or what has been presented tonight. I would ask for a couple of things. One is try to limit your comments to 2 to 3 minutes in the interest of time. We have a lot of people who want to speak tonight. Stephen and Catherine and I are going to keep our videos on, and between the three of us, we're pretty good at answering most of the questions. But if there is one that we don't know the answer to, please accept our assurances that it will be recorded, and we will get back to you both individually, and we will post the answer on the website. And I'm going to start with the people who are in the Q&A link at the bottom of the screen. Some of these will be, if they're comments, I'll just simply note that and move through it. First is a comment that says community that will be, I'm not sure, let me see if I can scroll this up a little bit. My question to the committee, why is the community involvement plan only weighted 30% in the criteria ranking? It seems that this should be at least 50% or more, as it is the community that will be affected by these retail stores. And the next entry is agreeing with that comment. The retail score sheet, Stephen, if you would, or Reese, if you would put that up. I'd like to show people, these are on the neighborhood score sheet. And as I mentioned when we first started, the score sheet has not been finalized. It will be presented for review and approval by the board on August the 18th. But these are the 5 components that go into this. And a big part of that score, a big part of this entire score, is in fact your input tonight, your input through the website or through email or other ways that you've communicated with us. The 30% neighborhood compatibility plan is a proposal. The site visit is a very significant portion of this. The applicant needs to present a customer and community education plan that shows that essentially that they're doing outreach. In addition to that, they have to demonstrate that they're engaging with the neighborhood and that they've got a plan for becoming part of the community and part of the neighborhood around them. The neighborhood compatibility plan itself deals with odor, design, on-site parking, a whole laundry list of requirements, and then any other information determined by the CEO is necessary. We've selected 30% because in looking at the totality of this score sheet, which as Stephen mentioned, will constitute 90% of the final score, that seemed appropriate. But if there's a belief that maybe needs to be higher, I have no doubt that the board will be asking us more detailed questions before they make a final decision, and that's always subject to change. Go back to the questions here. How will our county verify that residents are submitting letters and not being it moved again, it's doing this. That residents are submitting letters and not being undermined by cannabis operators, quote, stacking the deck, end quote, by using addresses associated with a proposed retail store and claiming that they are residents. First of all, if you remember from the slide that we just put up, a site visit is a significant part of that neighborhood compatibility score. And if we get a sense that somehow we're getting stacked letters or that someone's trying to game the system, we will take steps to mitigate that. How is the area measured to be included in the sensitive areas? How the crow flies or by streets or sidewalks? We'll say a 20-foot difference outside the sensitive area then not be a factor in the decision. I'm not 100% sure that I understand the question, but Catherine, I don't know if you want to take a stab at that.
So the way that we measure the sensitive receptors, it is the property line of the parcel that the sensitive receptor is located on to the premises. So when we say premises, what we're talking about is the licensed area of operation. So if you have a storefront with a storefront retailer, it's going to be to that physical premises location, not to the parcel that that storefront retailer is located on. I would say a 20-foot difference. You know, our regulations call out 750 feet. If somebody is 770 feet, they're outside that buffer. That being said, as Mr. Malekian and Mr. Yee have detailed, in the business license review process, they will be taking into consideration neighborhood compatibility, and that will factor in.
Thank you. There's one, I assume it's Ms. Lair, please do Old Orcutt like she is looking at Union Valley. We can come back to that, but that is the purpose of Union Valley was just selected as a way to demonstrate how people can go in and examine any site or any parcel that they want. So I would ask you to hold that, and if at the end of this, we have a lot of people who want to ask questions, and I'd like to make sure that we get to everyone. The same person asked, how did, I assume this is divot, how did this little divot on Clark Avenue come about? I don't know that any of us know how the zoning decisions are made. Catherine, I don't know if you have a sense about that. I certainly don't.
I'm not sure. I totally understand what the little divot that we're talking about is. So I'm not sure I can answer that.
What I would ask you, ask the maker of that question to do is to circle back with us offline, and we'll see if we can answer that in a little bit more detail. Is the 750-foot setback parcel to parcel, 750-foot setback parcel to parcel or dwelling to dwelling? Does the city's map outline all the sensitive use areas, i.e. all youth facilities? I believe that the way Catherine explained it and the way the ordinance explained it is that sensitive receptors are schools and daycare centers and those kinds of things, not necessarily all facilities that may serve youth part-time but are not providing permanent instruction. Catherine, I'm handing the rest of it back to you again.
So the 750-foot setback is not parcel to parcel or dwelling to dwelling. It is from the licensed premises, basically where the storefront retailer is located, that structure where they're operating under, to the property line of the sensitive receptor.
And I don't know, can you see the questions? Because the next 2 or 3 are planning questions.
Yeah.
I can, and I can answer those. So these green areas that were shown on the map are just areas in Orcutt that are zoned for commercial, C1 or C2, or mixed use. These are the zone districts that would allow for storefront retailers to be located in and operate out of. How did Montecito become exempt? The Montecito Land Use Development Code has different zoning regulations for their commercial. It is not C1 or C2. And since cannabis storefront retailers are only allowed in the C1 and C2 commercial zone districts or the manufacturing and mixed use, there's no opportunity to have those storefront retailers in the Montecito area.
Thank you. Can 2 different applicants apply using the same property if the property owner allows it? I think the answer to that is no. The application has to deal with one parcel and one applicant. I don't know that we've ever specifically addressed that question, though, Stephen.
So thank you, Barney. Per the business license ordinance, the county will only accept one application per person per proposed operation location. If we were to receive more than one application for a given location, we would reach out to the property owner to determine which of the two applications they would like to honor. And if we didn't hear back from the property owner in a timely manner, we would accept no applications for that location.
Thank you.
Sure.
Does the neighborhood compatibility plan include any traffic consideration or studies? The answer is yes. Traffic is a significant part of our consideration. Whether we need to do a formal traffic study would depend on several factors, including whether one had been done recently, and whether there was any sense that the particular location would demand it as part of the decision to make the information necessary to make a decision. Old Orcutt community is this is a comment, is a small family-oriented community with a large population of children, equine farms, and quiet residents. Many are senior citizens. A particular person evicted or owns natural healing centers, evicted the Old Town Market owners, a location that was there for almost 20 years. And that comment has been noted. I would go back to what I said at the very beginning of this, which is that no decision has even been considered, let alone made, about a specific location or a specific operator. How this thing keeps, I apologize, this thing keeps jumping around.
I apologize, Barney, that was me. And at some point I just want to break in and maybe take some calls and people who've also been waiting, because there are 24 questions in the queue and 28 people in the queue.
Let's do that then.
Okay, thank you. So we are first going to go to, and I'm hoping that everyone will be patient, because there is a list of 106 that I am scrolling through and trying to figure you out based on your name or a phone number, and not everyone has a full name. So first up is Danny George, followed by Wendy Steller and Joe Dana. So I believe that Danny is using Mia, and if that's correct, I'm going to open Mia, apologies. And you are unmuted.
Right, well, thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'm speaking today in general terms and hoping to, offer a historical perspective as to the last few decades in Old Town Orcutt. With that, I want to make sure that there's a continuity with the commissions and the boards that we're dealing with, that making the decisions, a continuity with those that gave us a say in what we wanted in our town. 30 years ago, the county decided, much to our benefit, as well as the other unincorporated towns, Los Alamos, Los Olivos, San Ynez, to give the communities a say through the process. In our case, it was the Orcutt Community Plan. 10 years later, there was a second phase of that process. And all in all, it dealt with zoning, streetscape, and architectural guidelines. That basically is responsible for what you see in Old Town today. Besides the physical changes that took place, it made for a cohesion of the population that is still strong today. Today, the word community is almost carelessly thrown around, pertaining to all manner of things. But this effort was a classic sense of community, and the results speak for themselves. It's become obvious that the county has put a big part of their tax eggs in the marijuana basket. I have my fears that cash money is going to speak louder than the wishes of the community. I personally live one block from Clark Avenue, the main street, and then a block the other direction to a complex of a high school, middle school, sports field, and gymnasiums. 6 days a week, the town is all about children. Truthfully, it can be a bit maddening. I've done it for years, and I'm getting used to it. But 6 days a week and during the school year, There are children walking, riding, hanging around all around Old Town Orcutt. So I fail to see how any of these, that there's any favorable benefit, any favorable benefit to having a marijuana storefront right in the center of this existing dynamic. You know, I talked to a guy the other day, we had a little debate, and he said, well, what about the liquor stores? And I say, well, you know, liquor's been legal since 1933, you know, and in 87 years, it's matured. And they don't really fool around, you know, when it says it's a liquor store. And I just feel, after looking at the summary in the LA Times of the grand jury investigation, I feel like we're almost in a episode of The Sopranos here, you know. I've seen.
Just a note that you're at about 2.5 minutes.
Okay. But, you know, they say it's a liquor store, or a drugstore is a drugstore. And I'm seeing this kind of sleight of hand, in a sense, like a wellness center, you know. You know, it's dope, it's marijuana, you know, and I don't think we need this right in the center of town, especially with this kind of sleight of hand. Maybe if they put a big sign that said marijuana, I may be apt to kind of think different about it. At least there would be honesty. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just confirm that was Danny, correct?
Yes.
Thank
Yes,
you.
correct.
Next is Wendy Steller. Wendy, if you're on the line, I cannot find your name or a matching phone number. There is a way for, I want to also come back to a couple of guidance for folks who have joined us late. A couple of things. We have a lot who are just by phone. If you wish to raise your hand, you can use *9 and it will actually indicate to us that you'd like to speak. If you are on a computer that does not have a microphone, you can also use a phone number. Keep your computer are on the webinar, but also join us by phone at toll-free 833-548-0276. And again, you can use *9 to indicate you'd like to speak. So I think, Wendy, until I can actually find you, I'm going to move to Joe Dana, who is, I'm going to unmute you. You have the mic.
Thank you, Gina. My name is Joe Dana. I am a proud resident of Orcutt. I grew up here, live here now, and just completed my 30th year as an educator in the Orcutt School District. I know and talk to lots of folks and have a good sense of how our community feels about the issue of cannabis dispensaries. Orcutt people I talk to acknowledge that cannabis use has been legalized in our state, but a good number of them are quite begrudging about it. And it makes sense, as Danny just mentioned, we're a very family-oriented community. We're about school and baseball and church and barbecues, and there's a real community spirit to Orcutt. The data bears this out. When we all had a chance to vote on legalization of marijuana back in November of 2016, Orcutt voters voted solidly against Proposition 64, which legalized marijuana use. If you look at the precinct voting data, 55% of Orcutt voters voted against legalization. That in a county that was for it by a clip of 61%. So we're very different than the rest of the county. And so while people in Orcutt recognize that cannabis use is now legal, they're not as enthusiastic about having a cannabis retail outlet as some other communities are. And so it follows, in my view, that the best locations for a cannabis dispensary are on the periphery of Orcutt, away from our schools, away from the core of our community. When I look at all the possible sites, the site near Highway 101 and Clark Avenue, to me, makes the most sense. It's well away from the core of Orcutt. What does not make sense to me is to approve a dispensary anywhere in Old Orcutt. We have a high school and a junior high school. These are schools from my school district. They're in Old Orcutt. And our students frequent places in Old Orcutt like Old Town Market and several of the restaurants there. Moreover, the merchants of Old Orcutt have worked hard to make it a destination, a place for dining, shopping, antiques, wine tasting, a place with charm. Cannabis is not compatible with the neighborhood of Old Orcutt. In fact, it would be, I think, jarring, really a slap in the face to have a cannabis retail outlet in Old Orcutt. And so in closing,
You're at past 2.5 minutes now.
And I'm closing right now. Thank you. So I would just ask, please be mindful of the way that Orcutt is. It's a little more reticent than the rest of the county. If you're going to put a cannabis retail outlet in our town, please put it away from the core of our community, away from our schools. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, I'm going to move to Kirsten Spallino. Again, bear with me. This is a long list.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you for allowing me to speak on the prospect of a dispensary in Old Town Orcutt. My husband Bob and I are property and business owners in Old Orcutt. We recently renovated one of the cottages that was brought down from Orcutt Hill by horses at the turn of the century. We have poured our hearts and energy into this town and have great affection for it. My family moved to Santa Maria from Southern California in 1976. The center of town, with its family-owned shops, restaurants, theater, and beautiful older buildings, were all a draw. It wasn't long after we moved to Santa Maria that the town began to change. Some of you old timers, like me, might remember this marketing jingle. Santa Maria, great idea. Yeah, Santa Maria, town center. Much of the quaint part of downtown was demolished to make way for the town center mall. As a result, we lost the historic feel, hometown vibe, and central hub of Santa Maria proper. Santa Maria became the city with a town center, endless strip malls, and no downtown soul. Perhaps transforming the historic part of town for something new and exciting, despite the economic promise, wasn't such a great idea after all. In Santa Maria, Old Orcutt has been that hopeful spot with potential to become appealing and worthwhile, a place that would compel us to stay home to shop, eat, and gather, rather than traveling to those other cities with character, like SLO, the Village of AG, or Los Olivos. Old Town Orcutt is a place where friends and families get together and children can safely walk or ride their bikes to and from school. There's a heartbeat in Old Orcutt, and it has begun to beat louder the past few years. Old Orcutt's business owners have invested all we have to contribute to an inviting atmosphere with business doors and windows swung wide open to greet our neighbors with friendly faces. A cannabis storefront with darkened or barred windows, locked down entrances, and a guard out front is the antithesis of the ambiance we are working so hard to create and sustain. There is a reason these storefronts are found almost without exception in the industrial parts of towns. There is a reason towns like Arroyo Grande have banned them in their historic blocks. There is nothing welcoming or aesthetic about these businesses, and in fact, they give off kind of a menacing vibe. Old Orcutt is a neighborhood town with family residences in close proximity to businesses. The potential 800 to 1,000 daily visitors cited as a positive would create congestion with parking overflowing into the neighborhoods and potentially dangerous situations as cars navigate our narrow main street. As far as economic arguments go, in the research I've conducted, I found no strong—
You're coming up on 3 minutes.
Okay. I've found no compelling evidence cannabis retail would contribute to our business or our neighbors' businesses. I'm asking the board to draw a hard line to protect and preserve historic Old Town Orcutt and exempt it, all of it, from cannabis retail now and into the future. There are no good reasons to place this business in Old Orcutt. The invested community members who work and live here overwhelmingly agree this is not a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Polino.
And now I think I have found Wendy. So I'm going to open Wendy's mic in a second, but on deck would be DJ Stornetta, Will Vigliotti, and Bertie Ellis.
And just a comment, we do have a lot of people who want to speak tonight, and we want to hear what everybody has to say. And I don't like reminding people of the time because I know that this is an important topic. So if you just kind of bear in mind it, to stay between 2 and 3 minutes, it would be really helpful. Thanks.
So if this is OTM2, Wendy, if that's you, there are 2 listings. I'm asking to unmute, so you should be able to unmute yourself. If for some reason I can't tell the difference between the 2, I'm going to try the other one.
Hello?
There you go.
You found me.
I found you. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Wendy Steller. My husband Mark and I have owned a business here in Old Orcutt for over 17 years and raised 4 amazing children here. Not only do we own Old Town Market, which is a site that is being considered, but we also own Deja Vu Antique Mall and soon own another shop, Stellar Home. So as you can see, my husband and I are very, very invested in this community, being that we both own businesses. My biggest concern—
Ms. Seller, I'm not sure what the issue is, but we're having a lot of trouble understanding you.
Oh, I apologize. Can you understand me now?
Much better, thank you.
Okay. One of my biggest concerns is the fact that this is a small community. It's a 2-lane road. There's near all of the sites, and the prospective businesses that are wanting to get the permits are stating that there could be up to 800 to 1,000 customers coming through Old Orcutt and at least 40 to 80 employees. Where we are a 2-lane road with 3 crosswalks, and those 3 crosswalks, one of the main crosswalks that all of the children use to go to school is the crosswalk on the corner of Clark and Gray. Being that Old Town Market is one of the sites that is in proposal, I just want to know how you guys are going to protect these kids that are having to go to school, and how we are going to be able to handle 800 to 1,000 customers going across a 2-lane road, and where are 40 to 80 employees going to park? I certainly don't want them parking in front of my business or my home. So how are you guys going to handle that?
So thank you for the question and for the observation. And please be assured that both parking and traffic flow are going to be significant factors in the decision about where a retail outlet would be placed. And Catherine, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but it is a factor. It is not. It is a very important factor and not something we're simply going to gloss over.
Sure, and just to add to that really quickly, so when planning gets an application, whether it's a land use permit or a conditional use permit, all of these applications will be evaluated individually for compliance with all of our development standards, including those specific to cannabis. And part of those requirements are having appropriate access as well as parking. So all of this will be taken into consideration as part of the planning process, as well as the business license process.
Thank you. And one of the things I'd like everybody in the audience to know is that we've been tallying emails, letters, phone calls, and comments on what the issues and concerns are. Parking and traffic in every one of the community plan areas is a significant piece of that, and that data in broad terms will be presented on the 18th, and in more specific terms when we come back to talk about a specific applicant. Next, Gina.
Next up is DJ Stornetta. DJ, are you able to unmute your mic?
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Can hear you now.
Thanks for the vine. Totally agree with Wendy. The infrastructure, both in terms of parking, the roadways and so forth, are entirely inadequate. The 750-foot sensitivity, or whatever the term is, buffer, is also inadequate. Orcutt Junior High and Orcutt Academy High School are right there. And this regulation, it looks like the store would be just right on the other end of it, does not take into account the traffic of the students, the children, and the families that are going to be going by this dispensary every day during the school year once this pandemic is over. This is an area of heavy foot traffic for children and families. So what you guys are doing by putting this in there, if it goes in, will brand and promote marijuana to kids, especially at ages when they are very susceptible to trying and using drugs. You're going to be putting marijuana right in front of them, not to mention the inadequate parking and infrastructure issues. You mentioned during this presentation of perimeter security. This location at 405 Clark butts right up against a residence. I don't see how any security measures can be properly within guidelines. And so I would look at that and probably say this can't be approved. Given that this is a primary location for families, you know, restaurants right there where people go and eat with their siblings and so forth, I just can't understand why the county would want to brand drug use to kids. Ultimately, that's what you're doing. There's plenty of other spots that aren't in sensitive areas. There's tons of empty stores. You guys can relook at the zoning, put it in there, get your revenue, protect Old Orcutt, and I think everybody would be pretty happy. And that's all I gotta say. Second note, this relates to kids and education. There are anti-drug movements like DARE and so forth that are taught in the junior highs. It'd be incredibly hypocritical for the county to put in drug sales while it's teaching its kids not to use them. So as we can see, this site is inadequate in several areas, and strongly recommend to the county that any dispensary gets put somewhere else other than Orcutt. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, just a reminder, we're not, I know everybody is focused particularly in Old Town Orcutt, and we're definitely hearing you. But I just want to remind you, we're not selecting sites tonight or vendors tonight. It really is just to get community input in the broadest sense as we get ready to develop the applications for the 6 community plan areas. So thanks.
Next up is Will Vigliotti, if I'm saying that correctly.
You are.
Go ahead, Will.
My wife and I are relatively new residents in Orcutt, and I think that one of the characteristics that drew us to Orcutt from San Luis Obispo County was a lot of the character that you've heard so much about tonight, both of the Old Town area and the outlying area of Orcutt. So it goes without saying that the community has a great concern in maintaining the character of Orcutt as a whole, not just the Old Town area. Not to dispute specific locations, because I know that that's not what tonight's meeting is about. I would like to begin with a comment and follow up with a question. One concern that I have, being a father of young children who are not yet school aged, but will be, and hopefully will spend a good portion of their lives in the Orcutt area, is safety. Any rudimentary research, however brief, about dispensaries and their locations in communities returns plenty of results about elevated rates of crime, not necessarily crime that targets dispensaries themselves, but associated property crime in the surrounding areas. So as we look at defining a neighborhood compatibility study or a neighborhood compatibility scoring sheet, we're being asked to decide which neighborhoods are compatible with crime throughout Orcutt. the burden on property owners, myself included in that, is overwhelming in terms of securing our properties from people passing through town, not necessarily our neighbors or members of the community. So I think it would be very appropriate to look at how these businesses will operate, both in terms of operating hours to promote anyone who may be visiting town to frequent this business, to do so during hours where they are in public view, to discourage property crime at night or in the early hours of the morning. So whatever business plan is presented, I think operating hours should be regulated to a time that's compatible with neighborhoods in the surrounding area, if you could even find something that's compatible with neighborhoods. All that said, the question that I have regarding the neighborhood compatibility scoring is, it's been mentioned that the score sheets will be finalized and reviewed on August 18th. Will community input be involved in the review process and the finalization process? Will we have an advanced opportunity to view these score sheets or the criteria that goes into the neighborhood compatibility? And additionally, how will neighborhood compatibility be calculated? Is there a minimum threshold for scoring on the neighborhood compatibility? I would like to see a minimum threshold introduced that's relatively high, given what we're subjecting neighborhoods and areas of the community to by introducing this business, to ensure that we are not choosing the best of terrible options to take on a business space. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Next up was Bertie Ellis. I had seen her in the meeting earlier. I now don't see her in the list. So what we're gonna do is now jump back to some Q&A. And then when we come back to the callers, on deck will be Trenton Scherer, Terry Carranza, Sheila, if I'm saying this correct, Givalisco, and Jesse Josephine Ponce. So Barney, back to you for some Q&A.
Thank you. Question, only one license will be issued in the CPA, correct? When will this happen, and how many CUPs for retail dispensary in process currently? The answer to the last part is none. Again, the ordinance authorized a maximum of 1 retail outlet per community plan area. There are 6 community plan areas, and these series of community meetings are the beginning of that selection process. Next question has to do with social equity. It says that I have stated in a few of these meetings that social equity considerations will be part of this process. It's asking if I can expound on the notion. I think that while there are no specifics laid out with regards to that, as I've mentioned this at other community plan areas, it's well known that the issue of retail cannabis outlets as a kind of an entrepreneurial on-ramp for people who may have been marginalized or disadvantaged in the business community or in the business process is a big part of this discussion. And when we were in the process of reviewing applications, and I'm not sure that we went through that in a lot of detail, but after the first phase, scoring the business application part, the technical part, if you will, is scored by county staff, and there's a process for that. The neighborhood compatibility piece is scored by senior county staff and a third-party vendor that we're contracting with, who has a great deal of experience with evaluating these kind of licenses around the country. And so to answer the previous question, that process will be explained in more detail at the board meeting. And the issue of social equity will be part of the discussion. I don't have a metric for it, but it will be given strong consideration. There's a comment about the grand jury. The grand jury report, and while I'm not going to get into a discussion about that, I want to assure you two things, and I've mentioned this at every community meeting. The board has gone to a great deal of trouble in helping set this process up. That really, until we come to the board with a recommendation about a specific applicant and explain how that a maximum of one applicant in each community plan area, until that time, the board of supervisor members are not involved in this process. And all of us are very well aware of how sensitive this issue is, how concerned people are. It's very obvious by the number of people who are here tonight. And you have all of our assurances that we are doing everything humanly possible to make sure that this process is transparent and objective. The question about, is there an economic impact report coming from either county staff or applicants regarding cannabis retail? In other words, how much tax revenue might be generated and how would that money be used? Once a quarter, we report, the county executive office, Stephen and myself, report to the board of supervisors on the amount of revenue obtained in that quarter. And the county financial officer during the budget hearing talks about the allocation of cannabis revenue. And last year, I can't speak for this year, but last year we were over projected, meaning there was a little bit more than what was expected. And that was simply set aside until this latest budget time, when of course COVID hit and kind of changed everything. But that it's ultimately up to the board and the budgeting process. Last part of Tom's question is, has anyone proposed designating a portion of the projected revenue? He gives a number directly back to Orcutt. That question has come up at a couple of different community plan areas. It is not part of the discussion currently, given where we are, which is not to say that it couldn't be at some future time. How is it that the old Orcutt Business District, one side of the, I think the question must have gotten cut off because it's not there. So I'm going to go to the next one. Is not the emphasis on the restrictive nature of the license application presented itself by Mr. Yee a form of verification that this type of business potentially has more impact, perhaps negative, on neighborhood communities, etc.? I don't know whether I would say that it does. I will say that the experience in other cities, including Santa Barbara, does not in and of itself suggest that. But I will say that I think the restrictions and the nature of the ordinance itself is an acknowledgement of community concern, and that people have a lot of concerns about this and want to make sure that it doesn't have those kind of negative impacts. And that's the reason for those restrictions. There's a comment about specific business in Grover Beach. Is this what we have to look forward to? I don't know. I can't comment on the location in Grover Beach, but I can assure you that it is our intention that it is not what you have to look forward to. Will each of the community plan areas be able to make their own requirements for storefront retail in their specific areas on top of what the ordinance lays out? And the answer is yes. All of this input that we hear both at the meeting and in the emails and the subsequent phone calls, etc., all of that goes into this neighborhood compatibility issue. We will take steps as we move through the application process. Once we get past the scoring process, we will, it'll be very clear when we start recommending a particular applicant, it will be very clear why that particular applicant scored highest in the community plan area. What if a daycare center wants to open within 750 feet? Will that be denied? I'll look to Catherine. It won't be denied, but it won't. I don't know whether it'll be denied or not. I'll look to her for that. But it will. That question has come up at other meetings, and it will not shut down the cannabis outlet if that permit has been granted. Catherine, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Thank you. That's correct. If a daycare center wants to open up within that buffer area, they would not be denied, but we would consider that when reviewing their application.
And if you want to go to the next one about the sensitive receptor footage determined to be 750 feet.
Sure. So the sensitive receptor footage was determined to be 750 feet when this ordinance was created. My understanding is that the state has a buffer requirement of 600 feet, and when this ordinance was prepared and approved by the board, this buffer was extended another 150 feet to be 750.
Thank you. There's a comment that the 700-foot restriction regarding schools is not the only factor. Travel patterns by foot, bike, and vehicle must also be considered. We agree, and that comment is noted. Is the board going to take in consideration the over 7,000 signatures collected stating that Old Town Orcutt is not compatible? Answer, yes. Question about the 750-foot setback. I think we've answered that. There's a comment on the grand jury report and some suggestions about this process. How is it that the Old Orcutt Business District on one side of the street is within the, it keeps moving.
Sorry, Barney.
How is it that the Old Orcutt Business District on one side of the street is within the receptor area and the other side of the street is not? Is some consideration given to a clear situation where 30 feet across the street, a part of the business district is allowed? Catherine, I don't know if you want to touch on that or not. I will say that, as I've said several times, all of these kind of odd planning things that come up will all be taken into consideration.
So the 750-foot buffer is what's in our ordinance. If there is something located just outside that, that is definitely a consideration that will be taken up during the business license review. But when looking strictly at our ordinances, if it's outside of that 750 feet, that is a potential location.
There are comments about, thank you, Catherine. There are comments about grand jury report. There are comments about a particular owner in a particular location. And again, that is one person and one location, and no decision has been made. No decision has even really been considered at this point yet. This is still, we're still in the information gathering phase. Some question about the extension. I think we've answered that. If cannabis is a medicine, what is the appropriate dosage? I think we'll move on from that one. Somebody more medically qualified than I can take a stab at that one. Some more comments about a particular operator. A comment about how can Orcutt like the big brewery and be so against cannabis was the same debate had. And these are, you know, we're not going to debate these tonight, but I just want to say, and I've said this at every one of these community meetings. Everybody that's sitting on this panel tonight, everybody that from planning and from business licensing and from the CEO's office, we are all very aware of the sensitivity and the concerns that this issue generates. And our commitment is to developing a process that is objective and transparent. And that you will have a maximum amount of input into what the final decision is. Ultimately, that decision will be made by the board, but I can assure you that they have been paying very close attention to every one of these meetings, and they know what people are saying. There's a lot of comments back and forth about different businesses and some more comments about the grand jury report. And with that, I'm going to go back to Gina for some more people that may be in the queue.
Thank you, Barney. I'm checking to see if Birdie has rejoined us. She has not. So I'm now going to look for Trenton. I'm scrolling. Bear with me. I'm not seeing Trenton by name or by phone number, so I'm going to look for Terry Carranza. If for some reason you are hearing me and you're not identifiable, there is a way to use the menu when you scroll next to your name, and you can rename yourself. You can also, I'm trying to watch the Q&A window, which is very full and also needs to be scrolled, but you could let us know there as well, because I'm not seeing Terry. Checking by phone number. I don't see Terry. And of course, I will always come back to someone if for some reason we are missing you. Sheila, I know that you are here, so I'm going to Sheila next. And you should be seeing a prompt to unmute your mic, Sheila. It should pop up on your screen. Okay. I'm not sure if Sheila is. Sheila, you should be seeing a prompt from me. All right. I'm going to put you in the queue, back in the queue so we can figure that out. Next is Jesse and Josephine Ponce. I am not finding these folks who had let us know in advance, so schedules can change. All right. Going back to, so up next is Deborah, no last name and no phone number. So I don't know if it's Debbie Connell. Debbie, I see you in the list. I'll unmute, and if it's you, great, and if not, just let us know and we'll go back to muting you. Thanks everyone for hanging in with us. It's either not Debbie Connell. Okay. Next up is Sarah Schiffer. Angelina Callahan, I know, is with us. So since I can find Angelina, I believe, I'm going to go to Angelina and look for Sarah, David Betts, and Robert Steller. Go ahead, Angelina, you're open.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine.
Wonderful, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to click on me. I just wanted to cover a couple of things. It seems like most of the people tonight are speaking. We tend to be sending the same message. I just want to reiterate that most of the Old Town area does not feel it is appropriate or compatible for a cannabis storefront. We're a small family and small business area. We have focused on keeping our small town charm and our historic Old Town feel. From community events to our storefronts and businesses, our Old Town market was the heart and is what you see as you're coming into our little quaint family town. It is not an intersection meant for high traffic. It's where our children walk by every day and shop for ice cream, catch the bus, get rides. Having a cannabis dispensary in that building would diminish our small community as well as be an eyesore and definitely not something we as a small historic town would feel pride about. On that note, it's not just that location. I don't believe anywhere in Old Town would be appropriate, again, because it's not what we as a community want, but also the traffic and exposure. Some of the businesses have held meetings and they brought up certain things. The things that they were proposing would cause problems. They were talking about how many employees they were going to hire. My question is, where are all those employees going to park? You're talking about hiring all these employees. There's limited parking already. So what, you're going to have them park in front of our businesses? If we're to have a storefront cannabis retail in Orcutt, I would ask they establish themselves farther away from Old Town, somewhere farther away from our schools, somewhere where the traffic can be handled with better ease, as well as farther away from our schools and our children. My child basically walks from her charter school in Orcutt to my business in Old Town every day after school, and I personally would not feel comfortable. I do not feel comfortable, or am okay with the thought of her walking past a cannabis storefront every single day. I agree with previous speakers and commenters on that. We are busy running DARE programs for our children. We're removing flavored cigarettes and vapors from our stores. The last thing we want is to make it sound like cannabis is okay for our children. I understand that many people need to use it as a medicinal thing, but I also believe that there are better locations for this type of business, that there is delivery options, and that there are a whole bunch of other ways that one can get that medication. It does not need to infringe upon our community, nor be thrust into our faces, nor become an eyesore for what we have strived to create, this historic, quaint, old town feeling. That's about all I had to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angelina. And next up, let's see. Quint, Jose Salazar, Mary McCormick. I know I see Quint. Looking for your name in here. Quint, I don't see you any longer, but I know that you have comments in the Q&A. Again, I will come back to these folks. Everyone I've been calling out is not here. Lily, I'm going to go to Lily Black if she's still with us. I saw her earlier. Lily, you had your hand raised. It's now no longer raised. She may have had to jump off, so I'm putting her in the pile. Steve Labard. Steve, there you are. You should be able to unmute your mic. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine.
My concerns are specifically for Old Town Orcutt and cannabis retail storefront licensing. The 1997 Orcutt Community Plan called for the revitalization of historical Old Town Orcutt. The Old Town Orcutt Revitalization Association, OTORA, was formed in 2003 with the goal of working with the County of Santa Barbara to revitalize Old Town Orcutt, established in 1904. I was involved with OTORA for 10 plus years. Nothing that we accomplished in the revitalization of historical Old Town Orcutt through the county's planning process, the Board of Supervisors, and a planning commission would allow a cannabis retail storefront. These planning documents include Old Town Orcutt core pedestrian area, Old Town Orcutt design guidelines, Old Town Orcutt streetscape concept plan, amendments to the Orcutt community plan, traffic studies. The county's and the community's vision throughout these documents is for a pedestrian-friendly town that includes traffic calming amenities, boutique shops, restaurants and cafes with outside dining, antique stores, small live theater, bed and breakfast, a community center, and other related commercial businesses. It's all in the planning documents. Many of these pedestrian-friendly businesses have been created by local members of the community, stakeholders that have invested their lives into the community based on the vision of the Orcutt Community Plan. A cannabis retail storefront is not a pedestrian-friendly business and does not belong in the historical Old Town Orcutt. When we were going through a lot of this planning, one of the first things that we had to do was we had to relax the parking restrictions because nothing had been built in Old Town Orcutt in like 20 years when we first got started. So they came up, they narrowed the road down to 2 lanes with the center lane for turning, and they basically they relax the parking restrictions so that people would come in and invest money into these. Now to see a pot shop come in and take up a lot of these valuable spaces that these other people have invested their lives into is just ridiculous. And I certainly hope you take all this into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let's see. Let me see if we can try Sheila again. Sheila had actually called me earlier and had been bumped out. I see that she's back. Sheila, let's try this one more time. You should see a prompt to unmute your mic. So Sheila, if you could, can you please send us a question or comments to add here tonight? Otherwise, I also have your earlier feedback that is already in the record because there's only, I can only do so much on my end. Okay. Mary, I'm gonna look for Mary McCormack. I don't see Mary. Mary Spallino. Again, unless there's a different name or computer that you're using, or I can't find a phone number, I apologize. So I'm moving on to Lisa Bedroki was on here earlier. Hopefully she's still here. I think Lisa, oh, there she is. Lisa, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. I just want to thank you for organizing this meeting. I've been a resident of the Orcutt community. I raised my family here. I've worked in county government, actually in land use planning, for about 30 years. Orcutt has become our home and our sanctuary, and I'm so grateful to have been able to raise our children and their ability to walk and ride their bikes to school. And yeah, we live in the Old Town Orcutt area, and I think you've heard from excellent speakers this evening on our concerns loud and clear. But what is actually happening is our businesses are being bought out and kicked out as we speak. And if I know anything about land use planning, CUPs, the process you're describing, nothing is going to happen for years to come. So from the perspective of Old Town Orcutt, we have a real paradox occurring here. We have businesses who have poured their heart and souls into creating the charm and atmosphere of our Old Town Orcutt, while at the same time, businesses that are looking to come into Orcutt and think they actually have a chance. I can't imagine any kind of chance for neighborhood compatibility, for getting business licenses, going through the planning process and looking at all the traffic impacts, that a dispensary would be allowed in Old Town Orcutt. So my question is, how can we dissuade cannabis operators from considering Old Town Orcutt as a potential site and kicking out existing established businesses who are struggling right now more than ever due to COVID? They're just hanging in there, and the face of Orcutt is changing as we speak. So it's great to talk about process and procedure, but we need help today. Thank you.
So Lisa, thank you for that. And that, I think the best answer I can give you is that that's what tonight is. I think it's very clear what the opinion of folks at this meeting is regarding the placement of a dispensary in Old Town Orcutt. I suspect that those voices will continue to be heard. And I can assure you that it will be part of the neighborhood compatibility review once the application period actually opens. again, I would just remind everybody that the maps that Catherine showed and the ability to look at different places, there are a number of areas within the Orcutt community plan area that are eligible for citing this business that are not in Old Town Orcutt. So I know that's the focus of the discussion tonight. Just a reminder that we're really here to talk about the Orcutt community plan area.
Okay, next we're going to go to those who've had their hand up. And Joe, I think I accidentally, yep, you're unmuted. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Gina. Welcome, everybody. Joe Armendariz representing Natural Healing Center. I want to just remark about the staff and the yeoman job you've all done. I know these are difficult circumstances, and so congratulations for pulling this off. As I mentioned, I do represent a company here in this particular situation, but I don't want to speak as part of a company. I want to speak as somebody who's been doing advocacy in Santa Barbara County for 20 years. As many of you know, Andy Caldwell and I have stood shoulder to shoulder in defending the future economic opportunity for the North County of Santa Barbara. There's a reason why our county supervisor, Peter Adam, refers to our area of the county as the colonies. Indeed, there's a reason why we're the only supervisorial district in the last 25 years where an incumbent has been thrown out of office because the people were not satisfied with the job that they were doing or the level of services that they were receiving. Somebody earlier, I think it was Mr. Dana, who I have affection for, suggested that the people voted against cannabis in Orcutt. This is true. However, it's also true that the people voted to tax cannabis. Indeed, so here is the chance of Orcutt voters to tax cannabis, to tax it at a rate that could potentially generate as much as $1 million a year in sales taxes to the county. And what I would advocate, put on my old Taxpayers Association hat for a moment, what I would advocate is that the County Board of Supervisors designate those revenues right here in Orcutt, where they will be reinvested, and we can make Orcutt a world-class place to be, to live, to recreate, to worship, you name it. Look, I take a back seat to nobody when it comes to talking about the value of economic prosperity, particularly for our families in the North County. The South County board majority has systematically outvoted our opportunity to succeed financially in this area of the county. And I recognize that there are some very wealthy people. Many of you might be on the call tonight. More power to you. But there are a lot of families struggling in Orcutt. This company, this industry, I should say, this potential opportunity here in Orcutt, whether it's Old Town or otherwise, is the opportunity to create a dynamic, financial, big bang, shock and awe opportunity, not just for the people, but for the businesses. If you're a business owner on Clark Avenue, holy cow, what opportunity lies before you. And let me just conclude, Barney, with this quick point. I recognize that there's a lot of people who are opposed to this industry, and that maybe goes back genetically in their family for hundreds of years. But the reality is that this opportunity that the people of Orcutt have could be the difference between our funding our public safety infrastructure and not funding it. And so I just think you can't overstate the importance of this opportunity that we have today. And I want to thank the staff again for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you, Joe. So now Alan Thiessen. You were unmuted for a second, Alan. There you go. Your mic is open.
Thank you very much for having this open discussion.
Alan, can you get a little closer to your mic, please?
I'm right on top of it.
There you go.
Still not hear me?
No, that's good.
You're good. You're good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My concern is basically for the Old Town Orcutt area itself. And I appreciate very much that you guys opened this commentary for tonight. This really is a small community. And there are a lot of young people in this community. And that is really my main concern. I would think that hopefully, and this is about land use, and yes, it does bring new taxes to the community, but we're also displacing in the sense of Old Town Market, we're displacing taxes that are already being generated here in this community. I would think that this, and if we're looking at this planning, hopefully we can look at something as whereas some new properties are being expanded without an existing business outside of the local Old Town area. Because this is, like I say, a very small community. There's a lot of children that are walking by this daily. There's a lot of residential around this downtown area. And that is my biggest concern with the type of business that we're proposing here. And the other big concern is we're displacing somebody that already had an existing business that is thriving or was thriving. Let's put it that way. So hopefully you can consider that when we do the actual permitting process. Maybe not look at something that's going to displace something local, already existing, and hopefully push them a little bit further out to where they are by schools and little small neighborhoods.
Thank you, Alan.
Gene, do you have somebody in the queue, and then I'll jump back to the Q&A for a second.
There's actually 3 more.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay. So Stephen Wagner. Oh. You should be able to unmute. Stephen, are you able to unmute yourself? There you go. You're open.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yes, my question involves the process of how the county has conducted its behavior about this entire process. And I think that the concern mostly is the Santa Barbara County Civil Grand Jury Report, which was highly critical of both Steve Lavanino and Dos Williams. And it also criticized county staff at the highest levels, who the grand jury report characterized as becoming too biased towards the marijuana industry and essentially ignoring the input of citizens with regard to the distance required from marijuana grows in proximity to schools. So I think that at this point, with regard to those criticisms of both staff and our elected officials who crafted the policy while they were actively taking money from the marijuana industry, as they were crafting the ordinances, Dos Williams and Steve Lavanino, I think that we have to really be suspect of the work product that's come out of it, including these hearings. So shoehorning marijuana dispensaries into Old Town Orcutt really isn't a great idea. And I think that you're hearing that from the residents tonight. And I think that in general, despite what top county officials are saying, the work product that's been created here has been compromised. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, so our last 2 of the callers before we go back to Q&A is Mary Jo and Thomas. So Mary Jo. There you go.
I think so. Am I there?
You're here.
Okay. My name is Mary Jo Silbernagel, and I have been involved with Old Town Orcutt since the early 70s when we moved from Northern California to here. In 1981, I became very politically involved in the zoning, the ordinances, the county regulations on the amount of structures that could be built, how high they could be built. And for the next 10 years, spent a lot of time with people like Danny George and other Old Town residents, working diligently on our own time, you know, Tuesday evenings for hours at a time, working through planning, working with planning, you know, trying to figure out how we could keep and charmize, I know that's not a word, Old Orchid. We did it. And then it took a lot of effort and political involvement and a lot of spinning our wheels, but you know, we went door to door, got the community behind us, and what you see now in 2020 with Ortora coming in 10 years later, I sat on the Old Orchid Architecture Review Board, which I was as the chair, which was kind of the ruling office. And then the merchants became involved. In the end, Old Orchid is what we imagined in 1982, 83, 84. Very historic, very quaint. And so then, you know, this whole thing about dispensary has reared its head. You know, I am not against marijuana. I am against changing or having it so prevalent in a community like Old Orchid. Old Orchid has, it doesn't, Mr. Dana, the first person that spoke, I believe, he said, you know, that outer near 101 green area, that's fine. I mean, that's okay. You know, out in an industrial part, you know, where there's not a lot of residences, where there are no children in schools and young families, I think that's fine. But I am very worried about how that process is going to happen. The man that bought Old Town Market.
You're coming up on 3 minutes.
Okay, sorry. The man that bought Old Town Orchid Market has an agenda, and it is very plain what his agenda is, and it is totally goes against what we as a community want to see happen here. And I hope that the county, in its infinite wisdom and procedures, will recognize that. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary
Thank
Jo.
you.
And also one more that I almost missed, Karen, but Karen, we're going to go to Thomas and then I'll come back to you. And Barney, then we'll go back to Q&A. Go ahead, Thomas.
Okay, thanks so much. Thomas Woodrow here. I'm a father of 4, actually live in Buellton. I'm a consultant in public affairs. I worked for, some of you might know me, I know Steve and others who are on this call, and we worked together on some issues. I worked for Willie Chamberlain, Supervisor Chamberlain back in the day up on the 4th floor. So I do some consulting and work with the county quite a bit up to today. Brooks Firestone, when he served in the state assembly and on the board of supervisors, and then more recently Elton Gallagly when he was our congressional rep. And you know, I have had some clients in the cannabis space, and I'm interested in the topic. I love Old Town Orchid. It is awesome. The community's done a great job of creating a special place. What I just think is you go through the process, you know, my advice, and certainly urge county staff to do it as well, is really, you know, instead of referring it derisively as a pot shop and all this, is really to look at how, you know, what is the reality of other stores, whether it's Grover Beach. I was involved in the Santa Barbara process for allocation of 3 licenses. And, you know, my understanding from Santa Barbara Police Department, et cetera, as far as security issues or as far as their planning issues, their traffic issues, is that they've been pretty much a non-event, that the people who had, you know, go to those stores tend to be a little older, you know, 55 and up. They tend to spend more money, you know, an average of $80 per. This is some information and research I had to do. I got introduced to the whole subject because my friend Art Fisher has MS, and he's a great guy, and he needed that marijuana for a pain regimen. And so, you know, he told me he didn't want to be treated as a pariah, and he didn't think it was a bad thing, and that, you know, he felt that these establishments, you know, were treating him quite well, and there was nothing seedy or shady. And I think the whole idea of bars and all this stuff is inaccurate. It looks and feels like an Apple store. So anyhow, look, I think that at the bottom line is it could be great revenue, and as long as it's compatible. I have 4 kids. I wouldn't want anything unseedy or unsavory around my children. So, but I think one way or another, you just got to look at what is. and not throw around a lot of myth about it. And if it turns out it's incompatible, then so be it. But I don't see that so far.
Thank you, Thomas. And now Karen.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, thank you.
So I would like to know why small communities like Old Orcutt, Los Alamos, and Santa Ynez would be places to put a cannabis storefronts. These are historical towns that have worked hard to develop businesses and community charm, a safe place for family and community events and to encourage tourism. A cannabis storefront does not fit into the community compatibility profile. Why not put a cannabis storefront in an industrial area with no small family frequented businesses where children do not walk to school?
Thank you. And a partial answer to that question is again, this is a county function, so again, the ordinance limits a maximum of 1 outlet per community plan area. And so the communities that you mentioned fall in that purview. If you look at the maps that Ms. Lair laid out, you'll see that the number of places that are available within some of these areas, the number of parcels that are available is actually quite small. So everything that's being said tonight is going to be taken into consideration as we move this forward. And I don't mean to keep repeating myself, but for regards to this particular community plan meeting, it's a much broader area than Old Town Orcutt, and we have certainly heard from you tonight about that. Gina, is there anyone else there? Otherwise, I'll go back to Q&A.
Go back to Q&A, Barney. Thank you.
Okay. What is considered outreach regarding the neighborhood compatibility plan? This is part of it. Your input through the website, through phone calls, through emails over the next several weeks is part of that, and the input at the board. In addition, when we start dealing with specific applications that then have specific locations, county staff will undoubtedly go out, as you might have noted from the slide we put up back at the beginning, a site visit, which includes not just the location but the neighborhood around it, will be visited by county staff as part of the scoring process. Does the county zoning map capture all the sensitive use areas, or are there other potential properties not noted? Catherine? Might have lost Catherine. Oh, didn't think so.
Hi, sorry, we were having some issues hearing you.
The question is, does the county zoning map capture all the sensitive use areas, or are there other potential properties not noted?
So the interactive map that we currently have up on our website captures all these sensitive use areas that we're currently aware of. If there are additional sensitive areas that you as a community members would like to bring to our attention, please contact us, send them over, and we'll evaluate them and update the maps as appropriate.
And related to that, it says in regards to the 750-foot rule, does this apply to bus stop areas designated for school buses picking up and dropping off students?
So the sensitive receptor areas are generally defined as schools or daycare centers or youth centers. Bus stops would not classify under this definition.
Thank you. And the last question is, can you go over how to get to the interactive map again? I don't think you need to put it back up, but maybe you can just direct Steve where to look.
Sure. So if you go to our website, cannabis.countyofsb.org, that provides an overview of the county's entire cannabis program. And on that website, you will see a link for the community engagement meetings. Clicking on that link will provide an additional subset there where you can click on the cannabis interactive map.
Catherine, can we ask you, Reese, go ahead and lower. Stop sharing your screen and let Catherine actually open the map and direct people where to find that again on the website. Thank you. Perfect.
So this is the county's cannabis website. And the latest news right now is our community engagement workshops. So clicking on this link will get us to the overview of these workshops. And down here on helpful links is a link to the permitting and zoning map. Additionally, you can also click under permits and licensing, zoning and permitting, and you have another way to access our zoning map as well. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Kevin. I think we've gotten all the comments and questions in Q&A. Gina, is there anyone? There's one more question. What is the potential tax money the county projecting to make from such a dispensary? I don't think that a revenue projection has been done yet. That will probably be part of the application process once we actually start moving that part of the process forward. All right, everyone. Gina, is there anyone? I'm going to close out Q&A. And Gina, is there anyone else in the queue from your end?
No, and again, there were a lot of names we read off who I do not see and cannot find. The list is, and if the names aren't there, so I apologize. And certainly Reese is going to put up a slide and Barney will address how you can continue to provide feedback or ask questions, and how to view this meeting and the presentation slide deck, etc. So I'll let Barney close us out for the evening.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for your patience, and thank you Catherine and Gina and Stephen and Carlos who was doing the translation. I know this has been a long evening, but we still have most of the people that started with us are here till the end. Please know, as Gina said, that the pathways that are in front of you to communicate with us are in front of you. Please take advantage of them. Please know that we have 2 more presentations next week, Wednesday and Thursday, for the 2 remaining community plan areas, but a lot of the information is the same. So if you think you missed something, you're welcome to join us on those. And this, I think Gina mentioned, this presentation is recorded, so you can go back through our website and watch it again. Again, I want to thank you for your time. I want to assure you that we heard you, and I want to assure you that we are committed to a fair, open, and transparent process, and one that reflects the wishes of the broader community plan area. With that, I wish you a good night. I wish you and your families safety, and we will talk again soon, I have no doubt. Good night.